Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Musician's Mentor podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Travis Mark, and I'm extremely excited to say that my guest today is LA-based session guitarist, Adam Zimmon. Adam currently plays with Ziggy Marley, but has a host of credits to his name, including Chris Brown, Vida, Iggy Pop, Dido, Shakira, Lissie, you name it, he's probably done it. And we're going to talk about that and so much more in today's episode. As usual, let me please remind you that if you're enjoying these episodes, to please leave us a rating or review, as it really helps us. Away from that, check out the links in the show notes for Adam's information. And don't forget that we're trying to do the whole TikTok thing now, so you can follow us there at Musicians Mentor. Let's jump straight into it. Ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, Adam Zimmon. Adam Zimmon, thank you so much for joining me on the Musicians Mentor podcast. I know it's super weird, and it's something I'm trying to potentially get out of as these episodes progress, but usually what I do is I ask my guests to do a brief introduction as to who they are. I don't need like the full history. I just like to give my listeners a little bit of a bullet point type idea so that they have an idea on a few things that you've done, even though I'll record an intro and post, but more so that they get an idea of where you're coming from. So if you'd be kind enough, please tell us who Adam Zimmon is.
Okay, well, to try and keep it brief, I guess that's a challenge, I guess. I grew up in Long Island, New York, and it might be worth noting I didn't even know I was going to be. I'm a guitar player, and I didn't have plans to play guitar as a career, probably until maybe my second or third year of college. And I didn't even go to college, even though I went to a great music school, for music originally. So that, we can get into that. But so I went from New York to Miami and ended up in Miami and ended up staying there and ended up being involved stayed in Miami so that I could get better, because I didn't feel like I could qualify in New York, and but end up getting immersed in all that world of music down there, and just trying to work. And so that was a whole trip. So I played a lot of Latin music. I played with Cuban musicians. I played in a Spanish language rock band, and that led me to doing pop music and playing with Shakira, which was probably my first big, sort of legit touring and recording jobs. But I at the same time, I always had a band down there that was sort of where I was able to let my sort of freak flag fly, and spent, I think, 15 years post-college down there. And it opened a ton of doors for me, as much as, and it's how I got involved in sort of the jam band scene. And eventually, after just sort of feeling a little too comfortable and a little, not dead-ended, but just too comfortable is maybe the one way of describing it. I moved to LA in a weird way to sort of reconnect with my, sort of more Anglo New Yorker roots, and play some more rock music and songwriter stuff. And along the way, just hustled a ton of different gigs. I don't know if you really want to go through the resume stuff.
We don't need to do that, but I do love the hustle stuff, and we'll get into some of that, I'm sure, because, as I briefly touched upon when we started, the whole point of this podcast is to talk more about, being a musician's cool, and everybody who loves music loves to hear musicians talk about music, and depending on who you're talking to about music, there's all these different layers that you can get into. But I find that while it's easy to find a teacher per se. Like if you want to say learn guitar, we're living in this beautiful time where you can push a button and you've found a guitar teacher or a video, and if you're diligent enough, you can learn guitar. But I love hearing the things that make musicians tick. You know, I love listening to stories about, well, like, dude, how did you figure out that you could get that gig? Or you know, versus like, hey, all my friends were using tube screamer pedals, so I bought a tube screamer pedal, you know? So we're definitely going to get into the hustle thing. And I've got a list of your credits here, which I can't even mention every single one because we don't have the time, but I will mention all your credits in the introduction that I'm going to do.
It's okay. But I was going to just try and wrap it up was what I moved to LA, and then, you know, as circumstance would have it, I ended up sort of my current gig, which is playing reggae.
Amazing.
which living in Miami or being Caribbean adjacent and playing some reggae in Miami did help. And, you know, so there's a little bit of a full circle thing there. But anyway.
Yeah. So, I mean, Ziggy, we're going to get to him as well. So I want to just back up a little bit here. I know you said you didn't have the intention of like even doing the music thing at the start until like your third year. You grew up in New York. You mentioned that you studied in Miami, lived there for a while, and then relocated to LA. So we've covered all of that very briefly. I want to, if you wouldn't mind, I want to delve in a little bit about location. How important do you think it is for musicians to be in the right location, inverted commas? And tell me why, when you decided to study, what made you choose Miami?
So I do think location is important. And but maybe not for the most obvious reasons for me. The location was important for me in that, so I'll go back to the end of the question first, but, about why I went to Miami. But, the thing about, for me, location was staying where I was at the time, where I knew I could get work. And it wasn't that I was getting great work or I was some sort of, you know, big figure on the scene. My feeling was that when I got into the Miami Music School, but I was not a performance major. I had a principal instrument as jazz guitar. So I was a little bit fringy, and I felt like I needed to get good. One of the things that at least music school in Miami, one of the things that's good, it's a plus and a minus, is it's a little bit isolated, and there isn't a lot of curriculum, and it makes sense too. There's no way that you can put that into a curriculum that gets funded that says like go out in the city and gig, right? There's no like street smarts part of studying at music school.
Yeah.
That's involved. That's your peers and all that stuff. And so the feeling I had was that if I went back to New York, I'd have to land back with my parents who lived about 20 miles from New York City. And I really just felt like I didn't feel like I had the tools to survive in New York City. And I felt like if I stayed in Miami, I could share a house and live real cheap. And I could hustle to keep the lights on there and get good on stage and say yes to everything. Right? So, which I'm sure you've heard a lot on the music industry. So in Miami, I knew enough people, and basically I wasn't even sure of it as a career until I started playing in bands with people in college. And some of the people I was playing in bands with were sort of these performance majors who that's what they were doing. So I thought, well, I guess I can give this a shot too, since we're playing together and I seem to be holding on. So, and the peer group that I had seemed to, you know, made me feel like I was starting to be qualified. But at the same time, I wasn't a guy that could really do club dates or like had the jazz repertoire or skills or the language really down. I was working on it, but to get better at my instrument, and I loved it. But I kind of knew.
Yeah.
um, so yeah, so the feeling of staying there was a little bit that I could play wedding gigs, and I could do like I had playing bands and just try and like get experience there. And so where in New York, like life is kind of a lot harder. It's almost monastic, and even if you have to live in Manhattan, you have to like, in Miami, it's like I shared a house with somebody. I had a car. We drove around. You know what I mean? So maybe I was taking the easy way a little bit in that sense, but so that location let me sort of just go out and be in the music scene and play with people and do weird, crazy gigs and be kind of immerse myself in that world that I was already starting to get involved in, and just like it was quicker and more immediate, and also I felt like was open to where I could get better on stage.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then that led me into all these different sort of things that were really like way different from anything that I knew growing up, but I was just like saying yes and around all these people. And in school too, I was around, one of my closest friends was Brazilian, and so Brazilian music and Cubans everywhere and all that stuff, so being down there really was kind of the way I saw it, the only way for me to sort of get good enough to survive. That's, subjective, obviously. And that feeling of being good enough to survive never goes away. It's still there when I wake up every morning. You know what I mean?
Like, yeah. I know it well.
And it's still in doubt. You know what I mean? It's still like you never know. So, but that was just when you're younger, you're even a little more empowered by what you don't know.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, so it helped, I think, staying there.
What were you doing to start getting the gigs? Like, so you were saying yes to the gigs. Were your peer group getting gigs and offering you gigs, or were you going out to try and get gigs? Did you answer like Craigslist's ads or things like that?
Yeah, it was, I think music school and the community of players and people, when I was in school, I started to go to like blues jams and things like that. I couldn't go to jazz jams. That was not my thing. Or I didn't feel comfortable doing that. But I started to like, and Miami in a way was kind of small, so you started to go and play, and so it was still, the community at school there. And so there'd be somebody who would be like, I have this wedding band gig or top 40 gig. And then at the same time, you're like getting into, you're playing in bands too. Yeah. And then they're picking up things along the way. And ideally you're trying to make recordings too, or get your foot into that, which is, really important that you don't know what you don't know, because that whole world, like the first time I was in a studio with somebody that was like an experienced studio, it was just incredible how far off I was. It was sort of like, we're gonna have to rent all the gear and like keep trying. You know what I mean? It was so it was that you just sort of like you keep kind of getting involved in community and then going out and meeting new people, and every time you see a band that you think is cool, you're meeting them, and you're just it doesn't feel, it's weird in a sense. In hindsight, it didn't really feel like you're really trying to meet people that hard. It just felt like everyone's sort of in this stew doing the same thing.
Yeah, that's cool.
So the like-minded people sort of attach, and you know, in hindsight, what you want to be a part of is kind of an art scene. You know, like I'd rather, maybe it's a little aspirational, but all the great, even looking at like music that you admire, jazz or right, like in a lot of ways, people don't realize they come out of art scenes. So you want to have like a bunch of people that are just like trying to make stuff and be around people that are involved in making things. And so, and that's art as like the verb, you know, you're doing something. And so, and my roommate who you've interviewed, Brendan,
yeah.
We you know, so we were living together. I didn't start with him, but it was all like there were these houses that musicians lived in. And so I moved into one of those houses and shared a room with other musicians, and then that had turnover into new musicians, and so that's sort of what's happening. You're just in the middle of this scene, and I think that's one of the best thing that comes out of being at music school, even though, you know, even if Miami is like a really small one compared to some place like Berkeley is, as I understand it. But so yeah, that's the main thing, you know, in a way. And I just saw like even just the logistics of doing that in New York as being sort of too like setting me back too far, and not being able to like, I just wanted to be on stage, getting good on stage, because I learned real quickly that the skills that I was getting in school were technically really important and really valuable, but communicating on stage and getting good on stage is a completely different thing. And I hadn't really done that.
Yeah, completely. What initially about the music bit you? What about the music bug bit you, if you want to phrase it like that? Like you said at the top of the interview that you weren't sure that you were even going to go in the music direction. So, you know, I'm sorry if it's ignorant, but just tell me a little bit about the background. Like, how old were you when you started playing, and what was it during your kind of college years that made you think, you know what? Actually, I think I totally want to do this, you know?
Yeah, well, I owe my parents a lot of credit in that, you know, my dad was, like probably like a lot of musicians you interview now, my generation he was a physician, he was a doctor, and not like doctor, but we're all like kind of have to have some sort of middle class or thing to sort of get involved, to have the privilege to get involved, which I learned after I played with Cuban musicians and reggae musicians, that they didn't have that privilege, and I learned I wanted to sound like that. Anyway, that's another story. But my dad he really loved what he did. Right. He was really interested in what he did for a living. He really cared about it. And it was a thing that like he was kind of obsessed with. And so that was something that was always a little bit imparted to me. And I was fortunate in that even in high school and middle school, my parents didn't I was not a great student. I was like, B student.
It's still pretty good.
Which it's pretty good by low B, but by today's metrics, it's like but they thought I was doing pretty good because I was, sorry to be rambling.
Not at all.
They were okay with it because I was into I was into stuff. I had interests. Mm-hmm. And he was understood, like I'd get in trouble for doing poorly in school, but like I was into music. I was into, so one of the other thing I was into was, speaking of privilege, was playing golf. And I got pretty good at that. And So I was just sort of, I had like school, but I had, and probably around 5th or 6th grade, I started playing guitar. But early on, my parents made me play. I took violin lessons as a really young child, like the 1st grade or something. And then I didn't like that. And then I took my brother. I had older brothers and sister, a brother and sister, and they took violin and piano. And then I gave up on that, or I said I didn't want to do that. And then I tried piano for a year and gave up on that. And so at a certain point, I was listening to, I heard all the music my older brother was into and all that stuff. And I was a nerd, and I thought guitar would help me be cooler, by 5th grade or something like that. And my parents said, we've tried, so you have to prove that, we're not wasting our time here. So I like taught myself to like thrash around a little bit on an old nylon string guitar, and I went far enough to where they would get me an electric guitar and then get me some lessons. So all through high school, I played music, and I think I did my first concert with a band in like freshman year, playing covers. I think we played like 6 songs from the first Police record.
Good choice.
And a couple of U2 and yeah. So I was a little we were in. I don't know why we were all drawn to, or what I was. That was probably from my brothers and sisters, but my friends and all were, into that. So all through high school, I played in like had cover bands and was sort of working through material, and I was taking lessons and eventually played in the jazz band and then that stuff. So I was into that, but at the same time, I was like going to school, and I was getting pretty good at golf, to the point where I was kind of trying to. I thought maybe I could play in college. So when it came to picking a school, University of Miami had all these cool courses that were like studio music and all this stuff that looked like, jazz, like studio performance. And, I had, by the time I was graduating, I was kind of starting to get into like, jazz, like Pat Metheny and stuff like that. And I was into Steely Dan and all the metal, all that stuff was happening too. And I was into that sort of, but a little left fieldy. So I saw all those courses, and then and I thought, well, and also there's like golf down there.
Yeah.
Maybe, so that's what sorry, it seems so rambling, but
no, not at all.
So it was just sort of, I still like, I had the gift from my father of saying like, what are you interested in? And like follow that and pursue that. And so I went to University of Miami undecided, arts and science, with the hopes that I'd kind of walk on to the golf team. Funnily enough, there were some other schools that were actually trying to recruit me that I didn't get
golf.
into. Yes.
Wow.
There was one called Skidmore that had a great music program, really awesome, almost like Eastman-ish. But I didn't get in. I didn't have the grades, and probably my audition fell flat. But I actually literally had like a letter from a golf coach, which was a crazy thing to imagine. But what I learned when I first got to school at Miami was I was undecided, and I was like, I remember walking through the music school and hearing people playing, and immediately thinking like, oh my God, I can't do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I guess I'm not, doing that. And then, when I went to look into the golf thing, it was like, well, you have to walk on, you have to, like, there's going to be open tryouts. And I realized again, which I probably should have known, but like once you got to college level, that I was actually too small. It sounds strange for golf.
Yeah.
But I was like 120 pounds soaking wet. And when you get to college level, the courses get longer. They're like almost like what the pros play on. And I just couldn't compete
Interesting.
Like I could score. I was pretty good on like the local level. But as a lot of people learn, you step up to, same with music in a way. I was
Yeah.
good in my high school. But you learn that like, oh, there's fully grown men here playing, and I'd be like being like 30 yards behind them on every shot. Like, and I sort of, there was a basic almost TNA like size thing to it,
I had
So
no
then,
idea that was a thing.
yeah, it's it's professional sports, So there might be a few small guys, but they're freaks kind of. I think I don't think they're big like basketball players, but they're professional they're strong, and it's when you're strong, right? Being strong and like so. And so I was like the first, like completely just undecided, arts and science, like walking around and long story long, I heard this guy play, and I loved the way he played, and I was like into playing guitar still, and I loved it. And there was this guy who was also like in the music school, but he was a jazz principal, and he was you have to have like a double major. So he was a music education, and I heard this guy play, and I loved the way he played, his taste, his feel. And so I just like figured, well, maybe I'll audition in the second semester and go to music school, because the question was like, when you go to your first year of college, it's like, what's your major? What are you interested in? So I was like, I like music. I mean, look at this music theory, all this stuff. This is what I like. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna try. And this guy I sat with this guy, and he said, like, prepared me for the audition. And since I wasn't going to be a performance major, or I was already at school, I was already enrolled, I could sort of slide into the program through the back door, kind of, because. And I wasn't even that aware, but at the University of Miami, I think my class, including performance, was like 6 guys.
Wow. The
entirety of the school at the time of guitar players, there's like 25 or 26 guitar players. So I was around all those same people. And you go to the audition, or you go to placement auditions when you're in school, and there's guys there who are just like burning, like they're playing bebop, right? They're like that. And then there's some guys like me who are like, I like just trying to figure it out, but have sort of a knack. And I've played music, I played in bands, and a basic sort of grasp of time and something that they recognize when they see you. And you have to kind of learn a standard, you learn a chord melody, you kind of, like, I don't want to sandbag too much. I was working on it. I had an idea, but again, you're empowered by how small your world is, so.
Yeah. And I think something that I don't really, I've gotten into it a few times with people, but it's never like the main focus. And obviously I don't want to make it the main focus with yourself either, but something that I think often gets overlooked, especially amongst young up-and-coming musicians, I hear so many things about cover bands, wedding bands, function bands. Oh, I don't want to do that. I want to just do my art kind of thing. Great. Totally cool, right? Art is important. Creating is important. But I think it gets overlooked how to be in a good function band or a good cover band or whatever it is, it's like a lesson in itself. Because the difference between creating something, while that is still a massive accomplishment, trying to learn note for note something that somebody else, like an Andy Summers character in The Police, has created, that is not easy. That is work. And so for you to kind of like give this perception that like, oh, look how natural I am at this, when you've had to imitate somebody else's playing, that's work. So, I think maybe, at least the way it sounds, it's like, even with you thinking every now and then, oh, I'm not sure if this is where I fit, or I'm not sure if they're going to like what I do, you probably find playing in these bands and stuff throughout your life, you had this like natural knack, like you say, to just fit in without even realizing, because while you were working on your stuff, you probably had subconsciously worked on so many parts that it was in your DNA by then, you know?
Yes, I think you're probably, and you've had all these conversations, you are hitting on the actual, probably the biggest thing and the main thing. Most of my real skill is function, is being good at what the function is for what I'm doing. And sometimes I get to be more creative, but that function of like, there's very little difference between playing in a wedding band and a top 40 band and doing a gig for a pop star, because what you're doing is like, you're getting a record and you're learning those parts.
Yeah.
Right. And the skill in that scenario is making those parts feel alive and feel like you're not in even in a wedding band, or feeling like you're still communicating to people, and you still want what you do to do something to people, to impact them, not to be too, high-minded about it.
No.
But that's so, like, function is still like what I do. It's no different. And so getting good at that and being in those scenarios and being with like older players because it's still like, even when you're doing wedding bands, when you're first out of school, or you're doing function like cover bands, you're probably with guys who are me now. Like, somebody will call me and say, I'm not going to, and be like, we need to do this thing. And I'm a little crankier about it. Or if I can afford to like, I have to be a little more careful with my time, because learning, 50 songs for a gig for X amount of dollars, when I have like, not even other work, but parenting and all that stuff, I have to figure out, like, you have to work smart,
Yeah.
But even that's a tough equation, because you don't know who's going to be on that gig, who might lead you to more of that stuff. And once you do that initial heavy lifting of all the work, then you can say yes, and it's like easier, to show up. We have less homework. Anyway, that stuff never stops. So function, my skill personally, or what I like to do in a band, is actually function. I am not a virtuoso. I am not, and that's probably why social media is more of a struggle for me, and something I've had is I am not somebody that sits down and like will like blow your mind with their ability, right? What I like to do, and my interest is sort of the working within an ensemble, or especially in a recording, and making something interesting, or making something feel good, and like that collective action that turns into something. I still, even if I like find the music to be horrible or whatever, when I plug in and like play with other people, it's still kind of, I love it. You know what I mean? So I just like that function, and not being kind of a virtuoso, or not feeling like I have this insane ability where everything's kind of beneath me or easy for me. I always feel a little bit lucky. And it comes with the problem of always feeling like a little bit impostery, like I might get found out or something like that. So that every time I do a gig and I play with people and then it's over, I'm like, man, I did it. You know what I mean? I'm like, whew, that was a close one. I made it through again. But I really love the idea of like, the function, like what's the function? What's the right thing at this moment? And leading back to that stuff of that original band with like the Police or U2 or whatever, that original like motivation, or like what are the, if I think about it, like what are those guys in those bands and in like the Clash, or what are they really good at? They're really good at like the function of the guitar rather than like the solos.
Yeah.
And I guess that just became sort of my thing, it has its baggage in this day and age, especially of not being like, blow us away. You need to find people that kind of are going to recognize that you play with, like, or artists or something that sort of you start to play and they hear it. They hear that you're like, they hear where you're coming from,
Yeah, it's an interesting point because, especially with the social media thing, I mean, if we're talking guitar, we're inundated with people shredding in these 20-second clips that just make your jaw drop. But, as somebody who does work in bands myself, I appreciate the skill that takes. I don't try and floor it for a second. I mean, especially when you see some of these people, like they're 7 and they playing like Eruption by Van Halen, and you're going like, oh, wait, I still can't play Eruption by Van Halen. Like, what the heck?
Yeah,
but
it's unbelievable.
It's unreal. But, I sometimes think once you've worked with musicians, and I don't mean for this to sound all high and mighty or even like the old gatekeeper kind of thing. I don't mean for it to come across like that at all. But I think there is a difference. I mean, there are things that I can do by myself when I'm practicing that I think, wow, that's really cool. But I would never do it on a gig because I know that I'm going to get fired from that band if I do it. And even though it's cool and it'll be cool for 20 seconds, the longevity of, like you say, creating parts within that thing, making people feel something, or even just keeping the job, for me personally, that's always been more of a, hey, I think I did a good job today. And, listen, without trying to jump all over the place, in doing my research for this interview, I saw many clips of you, including some great clips with Derek Trucks. And if you can hold your own with Derek Trucks, my man, you are doing it right. Whether you are shredding in 15-second TikTok, Instagram clips or not,
I appreciate that. But I think, so this is sort of, I was thinking about this before our conversation, but this is very like this subject, which I'm sure is like well trod ground. But so yeah, like I could really feel bad about myself scrolling through Instagram. I mean, these guys are like, they're shredding, John Coltrane at like it's unbelievable. It's just amazing. I mean, you get the whole world. It's incredible, but. And it's complicated. I really appreciate your framing of like, I don't want to sound like some old gatekeeper, because I will easily sound like that. Like there was part of me that looks at that stuff, or looks at, Instagram things and be like, well, there's nothing that, never being an older gatekeeper type, I never think that, well, that's definitely a person I want to play in a band with, or be in a tour bus with, or thing. However, I think it does, and I have seen, like, even fairly recently, like, some guy that was like, I'm always marvel at their like ability to play and solo guitar and all these incredible things, and finger tapping and melodies and all, like, incredible. And then I happened to stumble across like them playing like a song with a band, and within like 2 bars I was like, that feels weird, like it doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
Now it's easy to I can easily fall into that. Like there's nothing that any Instagram or anybody playing by themselves tells me that makes me say like that should be like I want that guy in a gig. That said, when you're talking about certain gigs that maybe I've aged out of, if you're talking about pop or like actually a lot of gigs now, what are they doing? You're playing with tracks, right? So like they might not be unqualified for that because it's not like, so it gets a little different when you're talking about like the world of sort of roots music, whatever, Americana, or that's why you see all these guys like or in my view, like there's this push of people playing like bluegrass and playing all these kind of musics, because even like the sort of real guys who are touring and stuff, because and I haven't done it that much lately. I didn't realize how much, because you're always playing with tracks in like pop gigs. So the guys that are doing big pop gigs, they kind of come home and do gigs that involve like real playing with real people to like kind of show, or do records that, like, even a record's not a good metric anymore, because you could do anything. It could be like,
oh yeah, anything.
But yeah, like so people are like, I'm just gonna sit here, we're gonna play bluegrass. So like, this is or and I haven't had a gig in a little while that was like track based. And I was talking to my friend Joe Ayub, who does like the voice, and he was just trying to explain to me like how much bands that don't even look like they should have tracks, like a folk group, like when you see them on late night shows or whatever, that they're all using tracks. Like, it's become, so I'm a little aged out. Like, I have to get back and understand like what's going on in terms of like, so that's a long way of saying that yeah, maybe for certain gigs, like if it's with tracks or whatever, that's fine, but when it comes to sort of things that I like and what I, and maybe now it's more legacy stuff or whatever, where everyone's just playing together, and maybe it's just a click, or in the studio or whatever, that feel, especially in the studio, like being able to play together and having control over the time and feeling like like being a piece of this organic puzzle and making it feel really good. That's a skill that, like, yeah, that solo Instagram guitar or all that stuff doesn't help.
I couldn't agree more. It comes with playing with people.
Yeah.
And, as you said, like earlier on in the interview, it's like, that's something they can't teach. You've got to get on stage with people. You've got to be in rehearsal rooms with people. Listen, I know it's changed. I mean, if I think back to when I was a kid learning or trying to learn and be in bands and all that stuff, I sometimes look at the advances of things like YouTube or having a DAW on your phone now and things like that. And it's
right.
Like, I sometimes think to myself, wow, I wish I had all of that stuff. And then another part of my brain goes, I wonder if I had all that stuff, if I would have tried as hard. And I'm stereotyping. I'm not saying people don't try hard. Some of these people out there are incredible. There's zero doubt about that.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to say that at all. But, I remember how hard it was to get information. If I found a player that I liked, I had the access to the linear notes of the record, right? Or the tape or the CD, whatever it was. And then, you were lucky if you saw a music magazine where they had an interview with this person, and you were like, wow, but it didn't really tell you anything about the player it told you, like what they ate for breakfast in their third hotel on tour kind of thing. And so like, now it's like I can type anything in, and it's wonderful. Like, isolated drum track for such and such a song, fill at 2 minutes 14. And I'll find it. And you're like, wow, this is amazing. I always thought it did this, but it does that. And it's like, it's amazing. But I sometimes just wonder, like, I just wonder where it's going to go, and I don't mean to sound like an old man when I say this stuff, but I wonder where it's going to go, because it's like there are people who are so embraced in it, and it's wonderful. You need to be. Change or die, right? That's what they say. But there's a whole nother school of it for me that I sometimes just wonder, like, I saw a guitar plug-in recently, a producer friend of mine was showing me. And this thing was incredible. I can't unfortunately remember the name of the plugin, but he himself, he's not very musically inclined as a player. He's very musically gifted brain-wise. He can arrange songs, and he's great with tempo and key, and he can figure out harmonies. He's a producer for a reason. You know, he's incredible in that vein. But as a guitarist, noodling would be a compliment to him, and he'd be the first to admit.
Right.
And he says to me, I got to show you this guitar plugin, right? So I'm like, oh man, I've seen all the guitar plugins kind of thing, right? And he's like, no, you got to check this out. He plays like 3 or 4 notes really badly on this little electric guitar he had hanging around. And I'm thinking, like, okay, like, what is going to be great about this?
I don't like the where this
Oh
is
my
going.
God. I don't know if I should be depressed or happy. I think depressed is how I left, but he says to me, check this out. Who do you want that to sound like? And I'm like, what do you mean, who do I want that to sound like? And he goes,
what?
I can choose styles, like from the most iconic guitarists in the world. So Hendrix, Vi, Slash, you name it. Like there was about a dozen guitarists, right? And I'm like, well, I don't know, man, like Hendrix. Dude, and he hits the Hendrix like little button on this plugin. And then, you know, like with most plugins, you can choose how much you mix into your actual track. Well, he's like, look, check this out. And dude, he starts adjusting the mixing knob on this little plugin. And it goes from him playing these like 4 notes kind of badly to sort of 4 notes with a bit more reverb and a bit more feel. And it starts to have that sort of Hendrix tone. And then he mixes it more, and it's gone from 4 notes to 8, and there's a bit of delay. And listen, we went through about 3 or 4 of the guitarists, and it changed the style of those 4 or 5 notes that he played to the point that he sounded like an incredible guitarist. And I was like, oh my gosh, like at first I was trying to play it cool, you know. I was like, yeah, no one's going to use that. And thinking, oh my God, in another year I'll have no work kind of situation. But it's just unreal.
Yeah, you said it. I guess the real... also, my brain is like, well, I hope, you know, those guitarists are like, they're getting paid somehow.
Me too.
That's another really scary part of it. I guess drummers have been sort of reckoning with this for a longer time, you know, but yeah, it's very, you know, another thing too is that like we consume everything in sort of a minute, or it was TikTok can be 3 minute, like that's a whole different thing too, you know, and actually to go back to your generous compliment, like playing like the thing with Derek, like and the point is that it was wonderful playing with him, and yeah, it felt great, and you know, but I have to put a caveat on it. There's a huge difference between, you know, jamming for a couple songs and playing a couple solos, and what he does for 2 hours every night, right? And so that's a big difference. But at the same time, like that's the job too. It's playing 2 hours every night, or doing like whatever. If you think about some guy that plays some insane, you know, thing, or some incredible like Instagram of some guy playing some mind-boggling technical thing, or thing like that, like, you know, okay, like how about a gig for 60 minutes, and like what are you going to say? You know, that does so those things are very separate. And actually, maybe the silver lining on the plugin and all that stuff is like the premium will now be on like the people that can stand on stage and play for and have something to say.
Yeah.
In real life, in real time, because you know, so hopefully, you know, because that's a big challenge, you know, and to be honest, like there's so many incredibly skilled players, but to go out and see some music and not feel like, okay, I'm kind of bored, you know, is like, you know, I try and set the bar not to be a jerk about it, but just to try and have perspective on where I want things to be. And because I'm fortunate to have really played with and been on stage with people who are just incredible, like the way music comes out of them and they reach people. You know, a lot of times if you go see some music, you like, it's kind of normal to be like, oh, that sounds good, or to be like thing, but you know that like these people who are really great, like there's just like you don't even have time to decide. They just like it just hits you like a physical thing that you get blindsided by it. So when you go to a club or something and you see something that's really like really visceral and urgent, you just know it. So I think that will always still be sort of like where we have to hope there's, you know,
I do agree.
Still value, you know, because like in a way things become just like sort of misinformation about, you know, but like, or the uncanny valley, you know, where you're looking at something and it's like, you can't tell in your bones, you just, something doesn't feel right, or it doesn't feel good, you know, it doesn't give you the same feeling. But who knows? At the same time, as older guy, I do try and keep in mind that, like, I heard Pete Townsend, one of my favorites, also say, you know, I'm at my age, if I understand what a 21-year-old is doing, they're doing it wrong.
That's true.
Like,
that's actually a great way to look at it.
It's supposed to be like kind of baffling and confusing, and so and yeah, so I thought that was a really valuable.
Yeah, I agree. Adam, let's switch gears for a second. Let's talk about the Ziggy Marley gig. I know you've been with Ziggy for quite a while. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, your credits are just super, super impressive. I'm not going to list them now, but I know I said it already. I'll list them in the intro.
Thank you.
If you wouldn't mind, I know you mentioned that you got the Shakira gig, and I know that there was probably a transition period from going from like these jam bands and the cover bands and the function bands into getting that gig. But more specifically, tell us a little bit about how you got involved with Ziggy and how that gig came about for you.
Well, the gig came about just because. So I had moved to LA and been here for a few years, maybe a little less than 10 years. But I ran into I was sharing a studio space with somebody in a big building in LA, and somewhat to house gear and to work, and that became like a whole valued community. When I moved to LA, I had already had a few friends already, and that was kind of an important piece of that. So, and one of my friends, when I and they were all really, you know, kind of great players and people, and we were really fortunate, you know, awesome peer group to sort of know. And so at some point I ran into one of them who said, like, you know, we're talking, and he said, well, I have an audition I might do the Ziggy gig. And I sort of lit up, and I was like, because in a way, like when I was in Miami, I played a lot. I had this band called the Spam All Stars, which led me into some of the jam band stuff. But it was very like, it was with Cuban musicians, and it was very like beat based, where I played a lot of groove and a lot of pocket stuff, and I loved doing that. And I also did play a few gigs with, or spent a little time with Inner Circle, like a reggae band, although functionally in a different role. So I had moved to LA and I was enjoying it, but I was doing like, funnily enough, I, you know, was playing with all these like singer-songwriters and doing those kind of gigs. And when I heard about Ziggy, I thought like, oh man, that would be awesome. I would love to do that and get back to playing some groove and stuff like that. So it turned out that this guy he had other commitments, and I sort of asked him to put my give my name to management. And then I kind of pushed on it a little bit because I didn't know it, but so they were going on tour, and I didn't know it, but really he didn't necessarily need another guitar player. Like, he doesn't, unlike a lot of gigs, he doesn't really use subs. He'll, like, if it's not the drummer or the bass player, he'll just go kind of a man down, and he'll play it because it's like he's real serious about the music, and he's not trying to, like, not that other people don't do a great job, but it's like, he's not that interested in that. But at this time, like, the other guitar, so when I reached out, or they got in touch, I sort of said, I'd really like to do it. And they said, well, we're not sure if what Ziggy's going to do, if he's going to take another guitar, but the other guitar player was going to be busy because he was going to he does the subs in the Kimmel show, and his role, he's an amazing guitar player, and he's still in the band today. He's a dear friend, and he's way more of a ringer than me in a lot of sense. But I did kind of push a little bit and, like, stay in touch and say, like, well, the tour's coming up and you'll know this week. And so at some point they said, okay, come to Ziggy's house and just sit with him and, like, learn these 4 songs. So there was no full band audition. There was, like, literally me sitting with Ziggy and his other guitar player, like, playing songs without a rhythm section, playing reggae without a rhythm section. And so I had, like, worked up a lot of the parts, being, like, sort of a little more of, like, the part side of the equation for this particular role. And so I was playing all the parts right, and I felt like, I've been doing this a long time. It was, like, felt like, oh, I'm a pro, I can do this, whatever. What I realized in hindsight, and eventually, so they decided to, like, sort of bring me along for this 6-week run. And what I realized in hindsight was, like, I thought, like, oh, I nailed it, whatever. And in hindsight, I realized that they were just like, yeah, we can work with this. Because these are the real guys, and they're playing the music that they've lived their whole lives. And so there's a real lesson of sort of knowing, like, I don't think I was, like, had any hubris or anything. I think I'm pretty good about that from all my experience in the past. But even still, understanding that, like, it sort of, when it comes, just like in the blues or something like that, the pro, air quotes, attitude of, like, oh, I can play anything, or I got this, is, like, it's not really that useful. It's more coming from the other direction, like, wow, this is really deep, and I have to, like, kind of be in service to this, and understanding that, like, the sort of abstract feeling and the sort of the space between everything is really sort of a lived and lifelong pursuit. And I think that helps, actually, with how they view you and how you approach the gig, and it helps, like, make how the music sounds. Yeah. So I think that a little bit was a little bit useful, and even still, even after halfway, 3/4 of the way through the run, I was playing rhythm guitar just with Ziggy, and he'd stop me, and playing the simplest thing you could imagine, and stop me and look at me, like, yeah, give it another 20 years. So basically, and that's kind of a compliment. That's a gift to somebody say that to you. Yeah. So yeah, and then I didn't do the gig for a few years, but he invited me to play on a couple of records, and then got brought along in a couple of years later. So they kind of, at the end of that run, they sort of said, I said to those guys, like, oh, I don't know if I'll see you guys again. They're like, oh no, you'll be around. Like, this gig works, like, once you're in sort of the crew, he keeps people around. So
that's cool. It sounds like a family situation, which is nice given how the pop touring world seems to work. That's really nice, you know.
Yeah, well, it's also real serious. Like it's real serious, you know.
Listen, I know we're running a little behind. I'm sorry about that. I'm gonna
I think
choose.
it's my fault.
No, not at all, not at all. You're actually so easy to talk to that I think I've also butt in too much. So my apologies. I just mentioned family with Ziggy, so let's actually shoot topics again and let's talk family. I know you have a family. Possibly a bit of a strange topic to talk about on a music podcast, but talk to me, if you don't mind, about some of the difficulties you may or may not have when it comes to juggling being a dad and a husband when you have a job that demands so much time of you.
Oh my gosh. Well, there are a lot of difficulties. To start with, when you're single and you're doing this job, everything is just sort of like, you know, you go on tour, you don't, it's a lot easier to leave, for one, as opposed to like, and the cost is a lot lower, really, just personally and emotionally, and everything you make is just going to you, right? And so the equation is very different. So that gets really difficult. And one thing I always talk about with other friends of mine is before I had a family and was married, and I'd be on tour and you have days off, they were just like the greatest thing you could imagine. Like, imagine you're in a new city. It's like you have no responsibilities and you're just free and you're hanging out, whatever. Now days off are sort of like these weird melancholy, you know, limbo, sort of where I just feel kind of sad, even if, you know, I'm in a beautiful city or whatever, because you think of you're away from your family and everything. So, and I realized, like, one of the difficulties is really, one, you just not, that the math is just, is a lot tougher, but it's a lot more just what regular people deal with, you know. I could like be real upset about it, but that's really like because I had such an incredible fortunate run for so long, you know. You realize when you're in your 30s and single and touring the world and everything, and you'll be like, you know, realize that most people don't get to do that. And so now, you know, it's a lot more like break even than it used to be. You tour and you have money and you have this time when you get off tour to relax, because you know, everything's a lot more, you know, grown up and adult. and that's a different kind of experience that I'm, you know, that I think for everybody it's just learning every day. But I'm so fortunate to have like an amazing you know, wife and partner that like understands kind of the thing that I do and what I do and who I am, that it's, I mean, that's the really kind of the main thing. And I go away and she's, you know, basically by herself handling 2 kids and working on her job and being a superhero while I get to go on tour. So one of the real challenges is that like is sort of the extreme, the whiplash of that, and realizing that when I come home, I have to be the best parent I can, and giving as much time to that as possible, or there's not really much choice. And so that makes sort of the transition to finding work in town and hustling like that much more challenging. And I can't help but sort of prioritize the parenting, because in a lot of ways we're both creatives and we're just making ends meet. But I have to hope that if I'm spending a lot of time parenting, that it'll be, it'll pay a dividend later when they're older. If it's not as easy for us to like sort of give them, it's just, all the legs up that I might have if I worked like a regular job and made more money. So that's sort of a little bit of the balance you're trying, or the challenges you're trying to find. I do think it will, pay off, but it's you are making like there's you do think of all that math differently. You know what I mean?
Yeah, time becomes more precious.
Time is very precious, and I'm older too. I had kids late in life because I was so fortunate and had such a good run. So yeah, you really do see that also the value of everyone says that it's a trope. Like you'll never regret spending more time with your kids, and the regret that people have, like as they get older, they did. So sometimes I stress that I'm not like working and making more money for them. And that is a constant stress. I think that's a constant stress for everybody with a family.
I think so.
But at the same time, I know that like I am spending a lot of time. I'm getting to be there as active a parent as I can.
Yeah, and that's more valuable than the financial side. In the long run, I believe you probably are right.
I hope so. I'm. That's where I'm putting my. That's where I'm choosing so far. So, I've had some well-to-do people tell me as much, but who knows?
I'm going to start wrapping up because I want to respect your time, but I want to ask you two last questions, if that's okay. I saw that you had a few film and TV / composition credits, as well as all your sideman and band work. If you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about if your approach is different when doing this as compared to, say, working as a sideman or a band guy. And also, what tips would you offer listeners wanting to try and potentially get into this type of vocation?
Well, let's see. The first thing, I really like doing that work, but I can't say it came to me as like in the standard way. I was fortunate in that I met a guy who worked for a commercial production company. And so it was much more of a straight line, and him saying like, hey, do you want to do music for this? And me and a partner sort of for this ad. And then he basically pitched us, and we had to, do a little demo, like come up with some stuff. But basically they would normally go to a music house or people that work in these, and they're just like these, incredibly skilled sort of people like your friend who can churn out stuff really quickly. And doing some of the film and TV stuff, I work with a guy, and it's just like, it is astounding how fast he can make music and how quickly he can like fit something to a picture and things like that. I was not exactly doing that. I was basically in a position to pitch, get a directive and pitch to the director and the creator. So it's kind of a straight line, where a lot of times these things work a little bit like, plantation is a little rough, but like people get sort of a directive of like, they're looking for this, and then there's 100 guys that make demos, and they filter for like, $150 or $200 if they're lucky, and then that gets filtered up to. So I was just able to like to be like short circuit that as a little more of like an artist like that they're hiring. And I really like that process. I wish I would like to do more. The way in is still kind of tough because so many people are trying to do that, because it's one of the clearest, like most monetized things in the business. Right. But that work is different. And what I like about it, and what I wish I could do more, is that it's really like solving a puzzle, and you don't have to have exactly your artistic, sensibilities tied up in it. But it also does involve the fact, like, having a large sort of background of music to pull from. So all the credits, all the stuff, all the crazy music I'm interested in, all that stuff. So like, I really enjoyed that idea. Like a director usually has a temp track or something like that, and I like that process of sort of saying like, well, here's some indie band that he thinks is really cool that they're not paying for, and then it's my job to sort of figure out, like, get in the zone of that. If it sounds too much alike, usually it reminds them too much of the thing they can't afford. So it has to be kind of have some element of surprise, make them feel cool. So I enjoyed that process. And it really involves sort of thinking of like the DNA of where things are coming from. So I enjoyed that, and I might have lost track of the second part of the question, the advice of getting into that.
Oh yeah. It was just, would you offer any tips on like listeners who want to try and get into that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think a little bit of the session stuff. I've done a few of those things, mainly just from a like through referral, and being a good reader can help. I have friends who are like really aces, the top guys, and I'm not as good a reader than that. But it's always something I'm trying to get better at. And the hard part of that is, like, it's not like riding a bike, it goes away. So I did one of the things I did years ago was a house band on a TV show. And I basically, like, it was like being thrown into the pool and just figuring out how to swim. And I could read music sort of, but the sight reading thing is a real challenge. I don't think that's really necessary. I think the people that do a lot of the commercial stuff, they have really great, I think, keyboard skills and like drum programming skills are really valuable for that work. But you got to really like it, because I think it can be really a real slog and a commitment in a lot of ways, because they get jerked around a lot, and I've been fortunate to work with people that are like kind of high up on the food chain on it, and they're so yeah, the commercial thing, the stuff I got to do, we still got our jerked around a bit, but we were fortunate in that sense, and I had hoped to kind of push into that more, but then I think I went on the road, and my partner in it sort of, like, once you kind of drop out a little bit, and actually the connection, the guy I was doing it with, I think he was with different projects and things like that. So being always plugged into that is sort of its own universe, and we'll see. I'm trying to still do it.
Well, good luck.
Thank you.
Adam, last question. What do you feel has been the best piece of advice you've ever received or potentially figured out along the way in regards to having a musical career?
Oh my God. I don't know. I'm gonna end up having to throw something out. Actually, specific to musical things, always are a little easier than personal stuff. So the musical thing was always just somebody that said to me, if you can make a triad sound exotic, you're on to something. So it sort of is like sort of exactly that thing of what we were talking about earlier, feel. Like, how you make music feel is going to be, if you can make things feel good, and you can make things feel good to the people you're playing with and the people that you're listening to, that's sort of the best way to keep working. But personal advice, I don't know. There really is, like, everyone that I know that I call a friend and is a peer and is successful are really just are people that I really admire and are really good people and people I would be fine living and traveling with in a small space for 6 weeks at a time, you know. So being a person that's easy to get along with and good to be in a room with and understanding and is really the thing that keep you working. You got to be a person that people want to hang out with, you know. And that's not always easy, you know. Some people who are virtuosos and who are the most amazing players, they pay a price sometimes doing all in terms of their, you know, personal skills. So the cream of the very top are like these guys that are both, you know. And so hopefully that's of some value.
That's amazing. All right, excellent. Adam Zimmon, thank you so very much for your time, man. I had a really fun conversation. I actually, you know, I feel like I say this to a few people, but not everybody. It's amazing when I look at my list of questions, how much stuff we could have still spoken about. So I love it when you can talk to somebody you've never met before and just, it kind of goes back to almost what you just said in the advice kind of answer. It's like, it's an attest to the type of character you are, at least in my opinion, that we could talk so freely having not really ever hung out. So I thank you for your time. I wish you nothing but the best for the future and all of your musical endeavors and your family and everything. And, you know, if you're ever in New Orleans, just drop me a line. We'll go get some gumbo or something.
Oh, we didn't even get into New Orleans.
We didn't even get into New Orleans.
My gosh, and that's really, yeah.
We'll have to have you back.
The feeling is mutual. Thank you so much.
Thanks again, buddy. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you, Travis.
I'd like to publicly thank Adam for his time. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for your time. As I said at the top of the episode, my name is Travis Mark. You can find out more about me at travismark.com. You can find out more about the Musician's Mentor at musicians-mentor.com. Make sure you check out Adam at adamzimmon.com. As usual, don't forget to leave us a rating or review. But until next time, keep pushing, and I'll catch you then. Peace.